I'd like to open the public meeting, Port of Bellingham Commission, May 21st. Take roll call. Commissioner Bell. Here. Commissioner Shepard.
Here.
Commissioner Briscoe's here. Let's show it all are present. Let's see. We got, I'll read the advisory committee meeting schedules. Marina Advisory Committee, Tuesday, September 10th, 2019 at 6 p.m. Commission Chambers, Harbor Center Building, 1801 Road Avenue, Bellingham, which is here. The TAC, Technical Airport Advisory Committee meeting, Thursday, July 11th, 2019 at 9:30 a.m. ARF Conference Room, 2005 West Bakerview Road, Bellingham International Airport. The BIAC, Bellingham International Airport Advisory Committee, Thursday, July 11th, 2019 at 5 p.m. The ARF Conference Room, also at 2005 West Bakerview Road to Bellingham International Airport. With that, we'll go to public comment. Do we have any?
We don't currently have anyone signed up for public comment.
Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to speak at this time, a public comment period? Okay. So we'll move on to our consent agenda.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through E.
Commissioner Bell.
I have nothing on this.
Mr. Shepard.
I have a question for probably Brian on C. This is the Yorkston Oil, or Ben? Hi, Ben. Could you just walk us through what the next steps on this will be? It looks like we are entering into a RIFS process. There's going to be some cost sharing with the tenants and past tenants taking 90% of the costs, with the port at 10%. Those past tenants are Exxon, Chevron, Yorkston. Walk us through what the next steps on this are going to be.
Yeah, so the process is similar to an RFS. The site's not under a formal ecology agreement or order to do the work. And so right now this is an agreement with the other PLPs to move forward with. It's more kind of design related work to figure out, okay, how are we going to take the next step to design like a full removal, the next cleanup action.
Thank you.
And how this is a MOTCA project. It's been designated a MOTCA project, so at a later date when it's our turn to have our 10% of the cost shares, that when we would be looking for some MOTCA funding to support this?
Possibly, yeah. This one's not necessarily on the radar right now for grant funding, but that is something that we can pursue with ecology in the future.
Okay. And so the amount right now seems fairly minimal, but the larger process will be next for the cleanup.
Yeah, exactly. So following this scope of work, which is mostly investigative work, we'll come to an agreement with the parties to move forward with the cleanup action.
Okay.
So,
all right. Thank you. That's it for me.
I'd just like to just take a moment on the D. I see our folks back with the fish and chips in Blaine. I'd like to say that's worked out quite well. We see lots of people there in the spring and summer for that. So it's been a good deal. So I'm glad to see they're back on the agenda here today.
A motion to approve consent agenda items A through E.
Commissioner Bell.
Yes.
Commissioner Shepard.
Aye.
Commissioner Briscoe's aye. Carries 3-0. On to our action items, if you please.
Yes, thank you. A motion to authorize the executive director to execute a professional services agreement with Landau Associates to perform environmental and engineering support services for the CK Fish site in the amount of $85,000 plus a 10% contingency for a total authorized budget of $93,500.
So I'm Ben Howard, Environmental Project Manager. I'm taking the CK Fish action item. So today I'm presenting the action item for authorization to execute a professional services agreement with Landau Associates for environmental and engineering services at the CK Fish site. And so as shown in the slide, the CK Fish site is located in Blaine Marine Industrial Area. And this work builds on the Blaine Marine Industrial Area projects that Brady has presented to periodic commission updates. Historical commercial activities at the site include petroleum fueling and distribution and fish oil processing, and that process included a use of a hydraulic press. The CK Fish is listed by Ecology as a cleanup site. However, there is not currently an agreement or order to do the cleanup activities, so similar to Yorkston. Initial investigations and cleanup actions have confirmed contamination at the site, which is suspected to be from the historic commercial activities. And an ongoing shoreline sheen has been observed at the site, and you can kind of see that in the picture on the slide. And there was oil observed on riprap underneath the pier, and we did sample that, and it had a signature kind of as a heavy oil or close to a hydraulic oil. So we have taken a sample and had kind of a preliminary characteristic.
And is this sheen pretty constantly present, or is it after heavy rain, or?
It seems to be kind of generally during the summer months, I think, when it warms up and maybe becomes a little more, soluble.
Viscous.
Yeah, viscous. So due to the uncertainty of the environmental conditions, it does warrant investigation to determine the nature and extent of contamination. So the next step for this project is to authorize the PSA to provide environmental and engineering services. And the port advertised an RFPS, and we did have one response. Landau Associates has been selected as the qualified consultant, and Landau has assisted the port in other successful environmental projects, including the nearby Blaine Marina Inc. Cleanup action that happened last summer. So the initial scope of work is to perform the environmental investigation, and again, that'll be done to determine the nature and extent of contamination. And then based on the results of the investigation, we will evaluate potential responsible parties, coordinate the findings with infrastructure planning, such as the bulkhead and building design, and then determine the regulatory and cleanup strategy. So it is anticipated the PSA will have future amendments to adaptively manage the project scope and budget, and this will be based on future regulatory requirements. So thank you. Any questions?
Commissioner Bell.
Yeah, my first one is, any feel for why we only got one response, one bidder, as it were?
That's a very good question, yeah, and we thought about that. I think, so Landau does have a very big presence in Blaine, and they have a lot of knowledge of the site and surrounding areas, and also with the consultant that helps with some of the design work, and I think that may have influenced other consultants' decisions.
The one bidder scenario is kind of a license to steal, in my book. So anything we can do to mitigate that in the future, because I know there's plenty of environmental firms out there that would want to bid on,
Yeah, we were really surprised.
especially at $270 an hour, for the head engineer.
It was a surprise, and I did hear from other consultants that they were going to submit, but for some reason or another, they didn't.
Can you do a deep dive into that, maybe, and maybe call a couple of them back and ask them why they didn't?
Sure, yeah, certainly.
If it's a fact, if it's the fact that they're too busy, I'd love to know that. Or if there was something in the bid submittal that only gave us one bid. I just would like to have seen some competition on that.
Yeah, certainly. We can call the consultants and let you know.
It's going to limit the scope to hydraulic fluid and fuel. You're not going to expand into metals or anything like that because you don't suspect that?
We probably will do some metals testing, and this would be, mostly for some sort of disposal type scenario, but, or to see if there was, for instance, lead.
Leaded gasoline?
Yeah. But
That's
it's,
part of this scope, or will that be a change order coming at us?
no, it would be part of the scope, yes. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I think it said they were doing 4 metals tests, sampling for up to 4 locations for metals. That's all I got. Okay.
Commissioner Shepard?
So why wasn't this taken care of before? I'm reading here that there was a previous cleanup effort and excavations Stop short of completely removing visibly contaminated soils due to the proximity of the buildings. What's
Yeah.
changed
So
now that?
Yeah, the previous cleanup work, so there was a hydraulic press at the site, kind of in between the two buildings that are there now. Right in this area, if you can see the cursor there.
Yeah.
And when they removed the press, they did find hydraulic oil on the ground, and they did do a fairly significant cleanup. But they had to stop at the building. They couldn't excavate underneath the building. And at the time, there wasn't any evidence that it was kind of leaching into the harbor at that time.
So
Are there-
is there no longer a building there?
There still is a building there, yeah. And that was part of the coordination piece with the infrastructure planning, is, kind of Brady and Greg Nickel are helping to look at different design alternatives for that bulkhead and building. So this environmental investigation is kind of meant to inform, that kind of process as well. If we can do a cleanup at the same time that we're doing infrastructure improvements.
Okay. And tell me about the costs for this, or is this looks like it's our bill at this point.
At this point, it is, yeah. Following this investigation, a report would be written, and we would, at that point, kind of look into potential responsible parties. We do know of a couple other historical operators there, and so we need to get some information kind of before we engage with them.
We may be talking with Holly and pre-1985 insurance claims.
Yes. Yep.
Good. Okay.
So Ryan could probably even weigh in on my questions. It's safe to say we don't know exactly where this is coming from, correct, under the ground there? I mean,
Yeah, that is true.
when this harbor was built, it's all landfill, it's all filled in. There could be a barrel of oil that was thrown into that when it was being filled in, when they were pumping all the sand from building the harbor there. We really don't know what's there, and that's why we're doing this, to try and figure that out, part of that, correct?
Yeah, exactly.
And so we don't even know the location. What we do know over the years is that at extremely low tides, the sheen shows up consistently, which brings me to the fact that's at tide level or below, which means that it's probably something that was put there when they were building the facility, because if it was above the tide line, that would mean it was put there after the facility was built and it's above the water line. I wouldn't think they would dig down while the facility was there to put a tank below tide level. So it's going to be interesting to see what they have to say, because I think this was done long before CK was put there. It could have leached out of the process that they did use and gone into the ground, but
Yeah.
the way it keeps showing up is a pressure thing. When the water drops below whatever it is, it can get out, and when the water pressure's up, it holds it in. So anyways, it'll be interesting.
Who put in
Yeah, and-
those
and the-
underground storage tanks?
Excuse me?
Who put in the underground storage tanks? Do we know?
I believe it was Chevron. I will have to double check with Holly on that. So we are talking right now about the hydraulic press. Further back in the site, there were some underground storage tanks as well. So the scope of work, that's why kind of on this slide you see here, encompasses kind of a bigger area, because there are a few different source areas. So we're not just talking about the hydraulic press.
Any other questions, gentlemen?
Do you know where the source of fill came from on the site? Will that be part of this?
I mean, most of the fill on the site is from,
Dredge?
historic dredge spoils.
Yeah, we don't need this barrel of oil.
No, I have nothing further.
Mr. Shepard?
Nope. That's it for
Diane,
now.
if you please.
A motion authorizing the executive director to execute a professional services agreement with Landau Associates to perform environmental and engineering support services for the CK Fish site in the amount of $85,000 plus a 10% contingency for a total authorized budget of $93,500.
Mr. Shepard?
Aye.
Mr. Bell?
Yeah, I just want to say I'm a firm aye on this because we need to get started, but I would really love to see more than one bid as we go out for this kind of stuff, just to see if we can't get some pricing comparisons.
Yeah, I'll get some information. We
Yeah,
can
I'm
pass
a
that
yay.
along to you.
What, his eyes are getting longer.
I mean, yes.
Commissioner Briscoe's an aye also, 3-0.
Thank you.
Commission, can we add an item to the agenda? Second action item here, we came to a settlement with Washington Federal today regarding the Puglia shipyard. As you know, that's a pretty fast-moving and ongoing concern out there at Fairhaven, where the trustee has been in control of the property for the last several months. They have now completed their work. I believe the trustee is leaving the property at the end of this month, and we need to have some sort of agreement in place with Washington Federal so that they can access the site, pay us rent, have insurance in place, all that good stuff. So if that's okay that we add an item.
Shepherd, is that okay with you? Commissioner Bell, is that okay with you? It's fine with me.
So we'll
Frank,
have-
if you would, please.
A motion by the Port Commission to authorize the executive director to enter into an amendment to waiver of landlord's lead agreement with Washington Federal National Association.
Frank Schmelik, General Counsel. I've been working with Rob Fix, Shirley McFerrin, and Brady Scott to unsort this issue. So what we have here, of course, is you had a lease, the port had a lease with Puglia Engineering since October of 2002. The monthly rent's approximately $60,000 a month. In a normal course of business, in September of 2014, Puglia went out to lease a bunch of equipment, and we provided a lien, a waiver of the landlord's lien. We have a statutory lien for 2 months' rent. Every landlord has a statutory lien on all equipment, possessions in a leasehold for 2 months' rent, commercial tenants, commercial landlords. So kind of a standard thing. It gave First National the right to come and assemble their stuff and conduct a sale. It gave them 90 days to do that. And then in 2015, Puglia Engineering entered into an agreement with WAFED to get financing to buy the Faithful Servant, about a $9 million transaction. Faithful Servant is a federally documented vessel. So then, as you know, in April 2000 or in 2017, Puglia Engineering got themselves a little sideways in investment in San Francisco. That forced them into bankruptcy in April of 2019. Originally, they had a Chapter 11 where they're going to try and work out bankruptcy with a plan. That did not work, and the court converted it to a Chapter 7 to liquidate their assets. Then things got a little complicated because Pierce County had a ferry sitting on top of the Faithful Servant that had a hole in its side that they were repairing. So what is key to know about that is that there was a rent bond that the commission had required, and there was a bond that from the same bonding company, because it was Puglia's bonding company, pledged to Pierce County for performance of the public work project, which is the repair of their ferry. You, commissioners, allowed us to enter into a stipulation in April of 2019. I'm sorry, 18. So a year after they sought protection, we're at the stipulation phase. And the port agreed to let the trustee, the Chapter 7 trustee that took over the business, to stay on the premises through May 31st to finish the ferry. In exchange for that, we received our entire rent bond, $243,000, plus from the construction bond side, the port received $218,000 in round numbers for partial rent through May and utilities. In addition, then WAFED said, look, after May 31, when the lease terminates, we're going to need to step in and take all this equipment and sell the Faithful Servant. We need some time. They agreed to pay us 80% of the rent starting June 1 and all the utilities. As they got into this, they realized they had to take out First National's position because First National had a superior position to some of the items, later assigned to a company called EH, and they paid $50,000 for that privilege. So now they had clear title and arguably a right to stay there 90 days from June 1, so June, July, August. Of course, there also is a stipulation they'll pay rent starting June 1 to the bankruptcy court, And I must say that we, port staff, led by Director Fix, worked cooperatively with WAFED, and they worked very cooperatively with the port, and we reached an agreement. And that agreement is before you today, and it's designed to meet everybody's interest. So WAFED said, boy, we paid 50 grand, can the rent start June 17th? You might say, why June 17th? Because we talked about it on May 17th. So they were thinking 30 days in advance. Mr. Fix and I were on the phone from the Washington Public Ports Association meeting, talking to WAFED. So they're going to pay 80% of the rent starting June 17th. And if they get all their stuff out of here before then they don't owe any rent. But their big problem, of course, is the faithful servant. That's pretty hard to get out of there by June 17th. So they'll pay us rent, and they have asked for the right to keep paying us rent at 80% of the rent through January 1st of 2020. Now, let's say they get rid of all of their stuff, their upland stuff that they want. And so what would happen there is they're going to conduct an auction. Anything that's worth anything is going to be sold, except the port owns the marine railway and all that equipment that goes with that. And then they're going to leave a bunch of stuff there and abandon the site, basically. But they still need the faithful servant hooked up. So 80% of the rent, $48,000 a month, and they've agreed, if in fact we need the site for somebody else who doesn't want the faithful servant, we can move the faithful servant to a different moorage facility, the ferry terminal, the shipping terminal. Warder's scratching his head if he's in the audience going, you're going to do what? But in any event, we'll move the boat someplace, and they'll still pay 80% of the rent, or $48,000 to moor it. Now, Dave Warder's ears popped up because all of a sudden the income comes over to his side, and he's going, oh, that might be, we could accommodate him at that rate. So he's happy now. I knew that would happen. First he's unhappy, now he's happy. So this agreement, I must emphasize, I think that WAFED worked with the port in good faith, trying to resolve what is a Gordian knot of interests that always appears to occur when there's bankruptcy and everything's being wound up. Meanwhile, you sign this, and then I understand port staff and WAFED are talking to various tenants and potential tenants to see about leasing the site. All told, the port's still down about $160,000. So on a lease that started in 2002, we're down $160,000 as of May 31st. And then if you took the lease rate as the base, we're only going to get 80% of our lease rate starting in June. Will be a short month, so it'll be down a little bit more than that. So that's what this agreement does. They also provide insurance. We also have the right to move the vessel in the case of emergency that we deem an emergency. We can move it to protect ourselves or them, as long as we're not grossly negligent, we're not liable if we move the thing. So we picked up the normal language from lay berth agreements and stuck it in here. So that's the gist of it. That's the final stage, and maybe Director Fix can talk about what happens next on the site.
So yeah, just a couple quick things to add. One, we would only move the faithful servant over to the shipping terminal if A, we've leased out the Fairhaven site to someone else that doesn't want it there, and B, there's capacity at the shipping terminal. We don't expect a ship that would get in the way of. So just to alleviate any concerns by Mr. Warder and Mr. Clark back there, or anyone else who's listening, that's not the intent of our shipping terminal. Is to.
But they like the $42,000.
We do, but we also like shipping business, and that's what our terminal is for.
It's got an anchor, too. We can anchor it somewhere along the way.
You could anchor it somewhere along the way. What's next is where we're talking to businesses that are interested in the site. One appeared yesterday. I was on the phone with one that's been a long-term interest for the past couple of months. I was on the phone with them yesterday as well. There's a third company has expressed interest. So there's a number of people talking to us, talking to the bank, talking to the various parties to see if we can't make something work. I'd say the level of interest is high. I do think that there could be a time where the site sits vacant as we're finishing up these negotiations and WAFED has moved on. It kind of depends on how quickly or what their interest is in either auctioning off the assets or selling it all together as one business. Obviously, our preference is the latter. We'd rather have them sell it off as one business, and that's what we're working with them towards. It's their assets, so at the end of the day, it's their call, but we have expressed our desire to have it be kept together.
You know, this commissioner would surely like to see it go as one business and put those 75 people back to work as soon as possible. That's our priority. I mean, that's a big deal. And my sympathies to the people that lost their jobs down there, and we're certainly going to try and put you folks back to work as soon as possible.
And that has been the number one priority of the port. That's been expressed to the bankruptcy court, to the trustee, to WAFED, every party. We've always said we want the folks to get back to work. There's a couple employees that are being kept down there just to make sure the pumps are running on the 2 dry docks. Those things are, you got to keep pumps running on them or they sink, and that would be devastating to not just the faithful servant, the dry dock, but also to the things that are hooked up to, like our dock. So there's a minimal level of staffing there just to kind of watch over the place.
Commissioner Bell.
Yeah, and add to that, the fact that they've been working up until last week or the week before, so that it hasn't been a long time they've been out. So the sooner we can get this occupied, the better. Because time will pass and they will go look for other work, so.
Correct.
If we can do you know if they're, the faithful servant seems to be the anchor on this whole deal for them, right?
You know, well, for WAFED, certainly.
weight.
It's certainly the most valuable of the assets for WAFED. Now, one of the companies we're talking to would want to use the faithful servant. They want to bring it, maybe do some upgrades to it, but they'd continue using it, continue operating it. One of the other companies has said that they have no interest in the faithful servant, and I haven't heard from the third company.
Are all the companies that are interested would qualify as like businesses?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So we still have the pension liability to.
Well, we understand, Commissioners,
deal
they've made some great progress on that.
Okay.
And so that no longer appears to be the hurdle it once was. The pension plans that are linked to Bellingham have had some productive talks and are trying to be cooperative. And so my sense is that's not the biggest hurdle. Like I say, WAFED's been cooperative. We tried to be cooperative. It's just better to everybody try and cooperate here to get to a common goal, which would be to sell all of the assets in the faithful servant to somebody else who steps in and operates a shipyard.
Commissioner Bell.
Well, I just want to say the negotiations on this took a while and they were masterful. This could have been a train wreck and could have been a real disaster for the port. The negative impact to us could have been tremendous, much more than the 100. I'll take that 100,000 based on what it could have been any day. So thank you to you all for your part in that. Shirley, thank you for all of that. And you really saved the port a tremendous amount of money, got us back some money we were owed. And I say this is probably the best possible outcome we could have even envisioned. If we'd have put this on a chart the day we knew about it, I'm sure that this would have been well off the chart for the good outcome. Everything else looked negative from here. So this is beyond our expectations. So thank you for that.
Commissioner Shepard.
Yep, and I'll echo that. I know there's been a ton of work that's gone into this, and as Rob mentioned, our goal all along has really been to get people back to work as soon as possible. And so I think we are continuing to work towards that goal, and I'm quite glad we've got some interested parties. It's also a significant part of our revenue for real estate. This is, if I'm not incorrect, our single largest source of real estate revenue. And so to get 80% of that is a big deal. It's still a loss for us, and this has been a integral part of our real estate portfolio and just revenue for this public agency overall. So I appreciate being able to show that and to see some of those revenues coming back in, and we'll keep working to get this shipyard open.
You're correct. That's the largest revenue-producing entity in the port. It is also a significant taxpayer investment in the site, obviously, with a brand-new dock there and a lot of other buildings and land, so.
Brand new cleanup.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I'd like to point out that this shipyard, to the public and the folks in the room, this shipyard has been a profitable shipyard. The shipyard was not closed due to the fact that it did not have work and was not profitable. The gentleman that was managing the yard, so to speak, or owned it, had some other business ventures he went out on, and that's what caused the shipyard to close. So our yard was healthy. We had a lot of contracts, military contracts for the yard, and hopefully the yard will go back to work soon and put the folks back to work. But I just want people to know that there was nothing wrong with the yard or its operations. It was taken down with some different investment.
Commissioner, that's really accurate. The reason the Chapter 11 reorganization didn't work was unrelated to this shipyard, which was the profitable part of the business. It was the contracts and litigation arising from San Francisco shipyard that was the anchor, that was just an anchor on the neck of this company. So that's what happened.
Thank you, Frank.
A motion by the Port Commission to authorize the Executive Director to enter into an amendment to waiver of the landlord's lien agreement with Washington Federal National Association.
Commissioner Shepard?
Aye.
Commissioner Bell? Yes. Commissioner Briscoe's yes. Carries 3-0.
Thank you.
Now I guess we'll move on to our Cherry Point program.
Good afternoon, everyone. Don Goldberg, Director of Economic Development. Wanted to welcome a few guests that we have here tonight. We have the Schechter Fialco family, who is one of the property owners, as well as Ron Emerson and his engineer, Oleg. They came down from Vancouver, so want to thank them for being here. This afternoon, Matt Anderson and Mark Goodman from Heartland LLC will be presenting an update on the 1998 Cherry Point study. Before I go introduce them to do such, I also wanted to emphasize why we did this report. What was the purpose of the port and the PUD supporting a study update on Cherry Point. So first I want to begin with why we did it, and that is Cherry Point's an amazingly important resource to the region. The region is in desperate need of shovel-ready industrial sites. The property is key to future growth for the entire Whatcom County. And we want to support and facilitate the coordination and development of a large-scale international business park for trading with our partners in Lower BC. What I want to emphasize is what we're not doing. We're not addressing the current uses remaining at the other sites at Cherry Point. We're not addressing the current county policy on fossil fuels. And we're not making recommendations relating to other properties. And then one last comment. This region is very difficult to find good comps and data. We did our best to find that. Heartland, as well as my staff and other parties, spent a lot of time putting the energy into getting the best data, but this region doesn't have as much data as you might find in places like Seattle and such. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to Heartland, who will run you through the presentation on the update on Cherry Point.
Good evening, Commissioners. Thanks for having us. Mark's going to walk through a lot of the findings, but I wanted to just point out at the outset that this is a fairly high-level summary of a whole lot of information that's contained in the report. So there's a lot of additional data and analysis in that piece of it. So we're kind of hitting the high points of the methodology and the findings here. We'll be happy to answer questions as we go or at the end as you see fit.
Thanks. I'll go ahead and dive right in here. In terms of the content that we'll be walking through this evening, giving an introduction over our methodology, objectives, which Don already hit on a bit. We'll walk through a site overview and our understanding of the site, a little background on existing conditions, and a little history on the site. Walk through portions of our market assessment that were important to us, and again, emphasizing this is just highlights of our analysis and excerpts from our full report. And then we'll walk through our feasibility assessment and some of the strategies we're thinking about for the port to be considering resulting from our analysis related to Cherry Point and industrial lands throughout the county in general. So here I'm outlining several of the opportunities and our overall tasks. And I think Don already emphasized that this is a unique opportunity in a number of ways, just in terms of scale and its unique size and within the state. And there's an opportunity to implement a business park environment that doesn't currently exist within the county. From our overall scope and tasks, we're conducting an overall refresh of the analysis that was done in 1998, but taking a different tact and a little bit different focus than what was done back then, over 20 years ago now. And really our goal here is to provide a strategy to further implement the port's economic development goals as they see them for this location, but region-wide as well. You can see our core tasks I've outlined there in the gray box. As part of our analysis, we conducted quite a bit of engagement to better inform our work, both from a market assessment standpoint, but also in regards to infrastructure and potential strategies related to the sites. And that included outreach with property ownership, the development community in Canada, real estate community in both Canada and locally, as well as the PUD, who we'd consider a project partner in this. They've been really helpful. Department of Ecology, and then some of the local jurisdictions, especially with our data collection efforts and trying to better understand the industrial environment here. A little brief synopsis of what was done in 1998. We have a little more detail in the report on this if you're interested. These are the objectives that were outlined at a high level in 1998, and these very much still resonate today. And we built upon this and outlined some additional objectives for 2019. I think these align well with what Don was outlining in terms of the priorities for this study. I think what's interesting is the challenge today, and this really defines our approach and our overall scope. The Port has identified a lack of modern professional business parks in Whatcom County, a park that includes modern amenities, utilities, streetscapes, et cetera, and that's a major challenge to industrial growth here. And it's that shovel-ready land that you see in other major markets, and the lack of that here. So that's the challenge we're trying to address and think about.
The other big difference between this effort and the 1998 effort is a dynamic that is kind of the evolution of the lower BC industrial market and what's been happening there, and then kind of taking a renewed look at what does that mean for Whatcom County. And that wasn't really so much the focus 20 years ago. And in order to get there, we also added this component of a proper feasibility analysis of running the numbers to better understand what is viable today, and there wasn't as much of that in the 98 study.
I would emphasize the 98 study was the UGA-wide, so it's the entire urban growth area, whereas our study has taken a more focused approach on a smaller group of undeveloped properties. So it's a different approach, a little different focus, a little more specific focus, I would say. And we'll get into that here. So this is our study area outlined in red, if you can see that. There's two main ownership groups. There's several other owners as well. The next slide will kind of outline who's within this study area. Obviously, this area is surrounded by your major existing uses in the Cherry Point UGA that I'm sure you're all familiar with. In terms of site ownership and zoning, this map outlines your current ownership environment out there. In the surrounding uses, both with just outside our study area boundaries and within. Within our study area, the largest landholder is the SSA property, Pacific International Holdings, just over 1,100 acres. You also have the Schechter family property to the south of that, which is your next largest grouping of property, along with Washington DNR owning a large swath of land in the northeast corner of our study area, as well as a property under the Watts family partnership. So this is our collection of properties that we were evaluating and analyzing, and we'll dive a little bit deeper into that. In terms of your existing environment, this map is a composite of a number of site mapping exercises we conducted using existing information. So we're not going out there and we didn't conduct our own wetlands delineation study or anything like that. We leveraged readily available data from past permitting efforts, county data, And this is a wetlands delineation study that was produced about 10 years ago, I believe. And obviously, this is a major component of the site is wetlands, in that critical areas environment that will impact any future development there. What you see here in yellow are general areas we wanted to emphasize as primary development areas. We're not meant to say this is the only area that can develop on the site, but from our conceptual evaluation and a feasibility assessment, we're trying to put some numbers behind what could potentially develop here, and you'll see how this impacts our analysis as we measured feasibility from a financial standpoint. But this outlines kind of the general opportunity sites that may require less mitigation or no mitigation at all. Obviously, there's opportunity for site consolidation and further study to see what else might be readily available to develop. But these are the areas that are generally not impacted by steep slopes, wetlands, and streams.
I think it's helpful to point out that this map is a little deceiving, the scale of it. It looks like, well, the vast majority of this is green and wetland and is undeveloped, but just to put it in perspective, these are big chunks of land.
Yeah.
So 314 acres of potentially developable industrial land is not a very common thing, let alone 1,600. So the fact that it looks like the minority of the property is developable, it's still a major resource in terms of land inventory in the county.
Just about 20% of it is developable. 80%.
Yeah, without further analysis or mitigation of wetland, yeah. So it's only a subset, but still a big chunk of land.
I think that's an important component of this is that this is, more could be developable, a large swath. I mean, the original proposal from past proposal efforts or permitting efforts, there's opportunity to mitigate, and we'll talk a little bit about that. This is kind of a snapshot of what would be potentially readily or more primarily developable.
If I can put this in just a little perspective, the main GP campus being developed by Harcourt is 20 acres. So when you look at the board mill building to the granary and that kind of triangle, that's 20 acres.
I could say, like, for example, in the Puget Sound, like the biggest industrial, closer in industrial sites right now, somewhere around 15 to, say, 40 acres, that's rare commodity. Now, that's a big, robust market with a whole lot of absorption, but 40 acres versus, potentially up to 300. So kind of putting it all in perspective.
Moving into some snapshots from our market assessment, I want to start with our look at the local economy here. And so this is an interesting diagram that kind of pulls together a number of different data sources for us to better understand the overall market trajectory related to employment in the different industries present in Whatcom County. This bubble diagram, as I would call it, is the different bubbles represent the different industries. This is employment data available through the state, and it measures historical growth, the overall size of an industry within your county, and then the relative concentration, which is measured as a location quotient. The higher the location quotient, the higher the relative concentration of that type of job in this county as compared to the state. So the farther to the right and the higher up you are, the more positive or stronger that industry is within. And then the bubble size just indicates the overall size as compared to other industries within your county. So I've highlighted in the different colors here what I would typically associate with industrial development or industrial employment, these three categories, which is transportation, warehousing, wholesale trade, and manufacturing. Manufacturing experienced, according to jobs data, quite a bit of growth. This is from 2017, so it's not fully up to date with 2018 data, which isn't quite available for this. But it's a strong indicator of a strong manufacturing sector here. It's one snapshot, it's one look at that industry, but it's important for us to understand, and just having a broader market context to understand what the industrial the industries that need industrial land, how are they performing here? And that's a relatively strong indicator from a manufacturing standpoint or a job standpoint.
And this is a snapshot from 2017, you said?
Yeah, and so it accounts for historical growth. So that's looking backwards and looking at how are these different industries been growing, and then also your current snapshot in 2017. What's the concentration and data might have been produced or being issued now that could look at 2018.
If we were to go back 10 years and look at the bubbles, I would imagine that construction would not have been at the top right part of this equation, right? So
Yeah, yeah.
what would be interesting to me is to see which ones have the most stability over time and which ones are less subject to fluctuation. Because I know construction would have been in the bottom left in 2008, after the recession.
Yeah.
But I would imagine some of those would have held a little bit more steady in that scheme of things. Anyway,
And
that's
there's
just-
ways to look at that. You can look at, you could calculate the average change over time. That volatility essentially is what that measure would be, which would be interesting to look at. So moving into real estate market indicators, we collected quite a bit of information on the real estate market. This is a snapshot of two indicators we wanted to focus on in particular, and these are actually compared to several comparison markets, really for context for us to understand how is Whatcom County performing and how does it look compared to other counties in Washington. So the graph on the left is industrial vacancy rates, with the blue being Whatcom County, and then that's compared to Skagit, Kitsap, and then a composite of Pierce, King, and Snohomish, just for a barometer of how things are going. I would say that a vacancy rate, and especially in a smaller market like this, it's a good indicator. We also reached out to local industrial brokers who would probably argue that the vacancy rate is actually, in reality, much lower than this. There's not a lot of high-quality space, and it's hard to find good space for local companies that are trying to grow. That's what I heard from several brokers consistently. Or someone that's trying to locate here a good 30,000 or 40,000 square foot space or smaller. Those are tough to come by. So this vacancy rate, although relatively low, it's likely lower when coming from the perspective of a potential user or tenant. Lease rates have consistently been climbing. They're at about $8 triple net, which is a little bit below what you're seeing in the central Puget Sound region, a little bit above what you're seeing in a smaller market like Skagit County. And I think that number is important for us to understand in our feasibility assessment and what kind of lease rates could you expect to charge here. We've confirmed that with a number of different brokerage firms in the area that's right around what you're seeing. There's examples of higher rates and lower rates, and in our full report we have some comparable analysis to see different products and what they're charging. But this is an important input for us in comparison as we start looking at the lower British Columbia market, which is an important part of our analysis.
And did you track that lower BC market in terms of the vacancy rate?
Yeah, so I've got a couple of indicators that we'll move into to do a nice comparison of Whatcom County and its performance compared to lower British Columbia and some of the submarkets there. It's an interesting story. And that'll just be in a couple slides. So another important indicator for us, or point of data for us that we spent quite a bit of time looking at, was land sale comps of industrial land. We were looking for undeveloped, whether it was raw or with some level of improvements and ready to develop. These are some of the examples of pricing we found across the county. And it's a pretty diverse range in pricing, but a general range was anywhere from under $1 to upwards of $3.34 for a most recent sale in Linden. And that was for relatively raw land. Utilities are available, but they haven't done major improvements to the site. What we're trying to do is get a gauge on what land might be trading for that's similar or of a similar nature to what you'd find in Cherry Point. It's an indicator to compare to lower British Columbia. So we'll start looking at, this is a snapshot of the comps, land sale comps we found in lower British Columbia, which is a very different market in terms of pricing and more reflective of what you might be seeing in the Seattle area in terms of demand for land and the pricing levels you're seeing. This is all converted to US dollars. And this is a snapshot of land sale comps that we pulled from some local brokerage firms across lower British Columbia. We chose to stay in what I'm calling lower British Columbia, so these aren't land comps in Vancouver proper. They get more expensive as you go closer in. So this is area that's readily accessible from Whatcom County, essentially.
It's a good thing you showed the other slide first. We'd be looking at Shirley like, what are you doing?
That's a good point. And so obviously there's a real range in pricing, but you're seeing a real lift in pricing, or as compared to Whatcom County. Land is much more expensive there.
How does this compare as you head south? towards, in the Seattle, say, Northern California area,
So if you're just picking on the Puget Sound a little bit, kind of Snohomish County, that Arlington area, you're seeing land prices at about 4 or 5 and escalating maybe as high as $7 a foot. As you get down into just south of Seattle, we're looking, in the SoDo area, but still for industrial purposes, land is at 70 to over $100 a foot. You get down south into the Kent Valley, that's comfortably at about $35 a foot. North Pierce County has recently been as high as $18 a foot.
anything with 314 acres?
No, none of that.
You're
But
talking
that
about-
scarcity drives price, right? So,
Right.
yeah, exactly.
So here's a comparison of some of the general market indicators in Whatcom County compared to the broader lower British Columbia area and then some of the submarkets that are there. These are selected based on their relative proximity to the Whatcom County market. You'll see that lease rates, so this has all been converted to US dollars, and we dove quite heavily into this and looking at lease rates, vacancy trends, absorption, and inventory. I think the focus here is looking at the pricing of land in Whatcom County versus lower British Columbia and that price differential and that opportunity that potentially that indicates. You look at the leasing rates and they're not that different. And that's something that we dove into pretty heavily because that didn't make a lot of sense to us. And one, pricing there is trending upwards. So one hypothesis is that you'll see rents rise steeply there as some of these newer products come online and you'll see some renewals and you'll see that evolve a bit. Two, there's a real suppression in capitalization rates there. And essentially what you're seeing is really low cap rates, even lower than what you're finding in the Seattle area, driving some of this pricing. And there's a number of reasons of the type of investment you're seeing in lower British Columbia versus Whatcom County. Those are two indicators or potential explanations of that. That's something that would be interesting to track and look at because we were scratching our heads a little bit about that in terms of the lease rates. And we looked pretty heavily at newer product, and those are the types of rates you're seeing there. So it's from a competitive standpoint, they're somewhat similar, a little bit above on average what you're finding in Whatcom County. Land prices are obviously way higher.
And that trend of compression of cap rates is having a big influence on land prices in the Puget Sound as well. There's just a ton of capital looking for finished lease product. And therefore, any developers building into that market with all that available capital, they're underwriting a lower cap rate at the sale, therefore they can pay more for the land. And so it really has something to do with the increases in rents, but the cap rate has a dramatic effect on the residual land value in the underwriting.
And hitting briefly on one area of particular interest is
Before you leave that.
Sure.
That's tremendous, that they can pay that much more for the capital cost and still maintain a relatively competitive lease rate with ours.
We think we think the land prices are a leading indicator, as Mark said. So somebody is speculating with these dynamics, and they're looking forward. They're outbidding someone else to get the land.
But you think the cost is?
We think the rents are going to catch up as that new product comes online, and a 1.4% vacancy in that big of a market is incredibly tight.
It doesn't justify the $8 or $8.80.
We think the eight is on its way up, right? And in terms
Gotta
of the
be.
rent.
Yeah.
It just makes no sense at all.
There's also a fair amount of industrial condominiums, so the strata, which is not something we have in the States. I mean, there's not a lot of industrial condominiums, so the ability to sell those off either to owner users or investors who are willing to accept a much lower return dramatically affects that.
Is it the Canadian banks driving those cap rates, or is there, what's the
It's
financial structure?
It's institutional capital that's looking for it, and it's true everywhere across the country in these big gateway markets. It's seen as it's a very liquid market, so capital can sit there for a time being and then move on to another asset class because there's a lot of capital going through it. So it's and that's just not the case in Whatcom County. Obviously, it's a very different type of market dynamic.
No, it just
So
tells you
without
what
that
you're
capital, you don't see the compression.
It tells you what we're competing with.
Well, competing with or benefiting from. We'll get to that part.
And one thing I wanted to add is the Vancouver market, as we know, has a lot of foreign investment. And often the foreign investment doesn't even need a return. They're just trying to place money. So they had this same issue with residential properties in lower BC as well.
And just hitting on a specific area we were looking at is the Campbell Heights industrial area, which is a major industrial, I'd call it industrial park, but it's multiple parks. It has multiple components to it. It's large. So I believe that number is current. It's about 1,971 acres with some capacity for growth depending on the planning process there. It's within our report, we have some specific comparables and a little more in-depth review of that specific business park, but that's just right across the border. So that's kind of a juxtaposition of an industrial park with relatively expensive land. A lot of our comps, our lease comps are from that area, and that was a focus of ours to better understand really the most nearby Canadian-based industrial park and understanding that. And it's only just over a half an hour drive from the Cherry Point location. So in the report, there's a little more detail on that, but that's of interest to us in terms of understanding the Canadian market and that lower BC industrial more specifically.
Do you have a sense of what they're driving into those industrial spaces?
In terms of the uses?
The uses.
In terms of larger users, we know there's been a lot of, a major lease, I believe it was 2 years ago, was an Amazon distribution center. So those are those larger drivers, those fulfillment centers. A lot of smaller strata space, which is condominiumized space, is making up, at least in Campbell Heights, a significant portion of the development there. Those smaller 10 to 40,000 square foot spaces, ranging in size dramatically, but those are accommodating smaller manufacturing, smaller scale uses. But it's a mix of everything, according to what we're seeing in this list. Here kind of gives you a sense. I mean, it's pretty diverse. A lot of it's connected or driven by the port and the connection to that. There's serving the U.S. market as well as the British Columbia market there. So it's those different drivers that we're looking at. And in the report, we do look at commodities trade flow across the border and seeing how that's trending, and that could be another influencing factor on what's locating in Campbell Heights or what would potentially locate over here. Our understanding is that in terms of growth in lower British Columbia, there's a real squeeze on land, and that's a real driver there. That from a regional planning and just like the Seattle area, they have their own standards around urban growth and protection of farmlands in rural areas. That's a real driver of up there in terms of limiting the supply of industrial land. It's a real, just like it is in the Puget Sound region. Industrial land supply is a big driver of this, or the limiting factor on it.
You mentioned, just real quickly, I did mention that Ron Emerson is here. Ron was one of the major developers of this property that we're discussing, Campbell Heights.
So we moved into we're calling our feasibility assessment. And split this up into 3 headers for us to walk through. Discussion of infrastructure, what's there now, what's needed, some of the challenges associated with that, and trying to better understand what it would take to develop out there. Looking at it from a feasibility standpoint, from a developer's viewpoint, kind of two views of that we'll walk through and give a snapshot of how we approach that. And then a look at the strategy, our framework for strategies for the port to be considering as they look at their opportunities for implementation at Cherry Point, but not just Cherry Point, also more broadly across the entire county in terms of how to think about the development of industrial land and the different roles the port could take. In terms of infrastructure, this is kind of a synopsis of the research and outreach we conducted, and the key areas we identified that will need to be addressed with any future development, and it's the topics you'd expect. It's transportation, it's power supply and service, it's water and sewer. Of these, I would highlight from a transportation standpoint, there is existing rail access. That's an advantage. It has relatively good access to I-5. It is about approximately a 10-minute drive. That's been identified as the likely transportation mode that you'd expect there. From needs related to transportation, further study and an understanding of required road upgrades and intersection upgrades, depending on the size and scale and phasing of any future development there would be really key. And their suitability for heavy truck and freight traffic. And then there are rail crossings there. You have to cross a rail essentially to get out there. And as something, any major growth out there in terms of employment and traffic, that'd be a factor. And when the timing of any upgrades, the costs of those are not fully understood right now. But those would be potential challenges and needs that you'd have to address. In terms of water, there's existing water service there for potable water. It's not viewed as a major challenge or accessibility issue. So one of the other infrastructure components that we really zeroed on was sewer access, which is a little bit more challenging. There is approximate sewer service in Birch Bay and their sewer system that they provide there, their sewer district. In terms of needs, any new development there is going to have to tackle that and how they're going to address their sewer needs. And we've outlined a few different options here, from connecting to a local sewer system like Birch Bay, if that's even feasible, and beginning that conversation to potentially septic system alternatives depending on the suitability of that and how that might meet the needs of a development out there if it would be allowed, to a localized sewage treatment plant, to a package plant serving individual developments as well. So there's a few options there that would need further study, and there's potential opportunity for the port and others, the PUD, for example, to engage in that process. But that was identified as one of the more major challenges or needs on the sites to figure that part out.
So with the potable water is addressing on site, are you thinking a well, or are you thinking treatment of existing non-potable from PUD?
We discussed both wells and then leveraging the PUD's existing service there. So in terms of the demand for potable water, it's not viewed as a challenge when our conversations with PUD that it would be addressable. It would be something that would have to be addressed on any major development in terms of the water source, but localized treatment and then leveraging the PUD's resources there wasn't viewed as a major hurdle. It was essentially our finding.
It seems like that could be a taxing amount to try and achieve from a well source.
Well, it
given
depends
the
on what
size.
it depends on what the use is too.
Yeah.
So manufacturing that's really reliant on it, that may be too much. But if it's logistics space, warehouse is a pretty low water user, low sewage user as well.
And that difference between non-potable and the ability to provide that through the PD, if it's an industrial use, heavy water use associated with some kind of manufacturing process, the potable water demand, it would depend on the density of employment you have out there. But in our conversations, it wasn't within the typical employment density you see with industrial uses. That wasn't viewed as a major hurdle, although it would need to be fully explored.
Did BB Warm have enough room? Birch Bay Water and Sewer, was there enough, clearly not enough capacity now, but was there enough room on site to expand, to accommodate?
That would still need to be determined. One,
Just because it's there, that's why you said it. You don't know if it's got enough space to handle any
a demand
increase.
study as part of their modeling would need to be conducted, the impact on their system and their future growth. That all would need to happen.
And their willingness to take it
Yeah,
on.
and their willingness to engage in that, and would they want to or
Their
not.
tank's just up the road from my house, it's not that
Yeah,
big.
that's a big question mark, hence why it's not a given, that's for sure. Related to the wetlands component that I was talking about and their presence on the site, we took a look at wetland mitigation banks. There's a nearby existing wetlands mitigation bank with illumination land. The city of Bellingham is in the process of permitting a wetland mitigation bank, and one strategy or idea we've been looking at is the feasibility of a wetland mitigation bank on the site itself. We didn't dive into a full market study about what that would look like or full financial analysis, but it was something that we wanted to get smarter on. And so as part of our work and analysis, we provide some context and thoughts around considerations at Cherry Point, whether you implemented a standalone wetland mitigation bank, the process and potential demand and risks associated with that, but also what we'd really recommend is better understanding how that might serve development there, but also serve as a mitigation bank countywide or across the the OREA, which is would generally be your service area. So it's not something we dove too deep into, except to better understand the process and something that could be on the table. In terms of existing wetland mitigation banks in the area, there isn't one that serves the broader market. Our understanding is with the Illumination wetland mitigation bank, that's somewhat limited in who can leverage that and use it. And it's obviously a key component of development here with the presence of wetlands across the county. So there's the potential for that and this area to serve a need that's not being met. But it's something we need further study and is worth looking at as part of a potential strategy for the site or for the port to be getting smarter on.
So jumping into the feasibility assessment itself, we took two different views of this. The first is a static view, kind of boiling back the real estate economics to a residual land value. So that's really trying to arrive at what is a number that a developer could afford to pay for a piece of land given a set of assumptions and a lot of the inputs that we walk through in terms of rents, construction costs, and so forth. The second perspective that we wanted to look at was that of a land developer. So if I was taking down a chunk of land and then my intent was to do the horizontal improvements and then sell off chunks of that land either to users or to other developers to take it forward to the next level. So one kind of informs the other, but it's helpful, I think, from our perspective to kind of see, what's viable and from which perspective.
And so, as part of our analysis, we prescribed three scenarios. These are conceptual in nature. And this, you may recognize these areas. These are the areas we identified earlier on as what we're calling primary development areas. And really what we're trying to do in our analysis is illustrate what different size scenarios look like from an absorption and financial standpoint, a feasibility standpoint. And so what I've outlined here, we didn't dive into all the detail that we went into that's housed in our report itself. The three scenarios we modeled were a smaller 50-acre scenario, a mid-sized development at 100 acres. When I say mid-sized, that's a large industrial project. And then leveraging something closer to what we were projecting as a full build-out of what is readily available or primarily developable across the entire study area. Again, these are illustrative, and what we're trying to do is accomplish a better understanding of absorption rates and what would be required and potential impact on feasibility and what made sense for this area. So this is kind of a snapshot of how we were viewing this site and how we were evaluating it.
Just to put it in perspective, at a 0.4 FAR, so relationship of building area to land area, 0.4 is like 40% lot coverage, is pretty typical of a modern industrial facility. Just that 50-acre piece is over 800,000 square feet of building area at that ratio. So just keeping that in mind, that's a ton of square footage just on 50 acres alone.
And we're focusing a lot on this the eastern quadrant there as the buildable space. Who's the overlay of the landowner for that spot?
That's the Schechter property that's owned by the Schechter family.
Okay.
And the part just north of that then would be the SSA portion, the larger.
Where are the transportation corridors? And where's your rail, where's your roads through that area? Which parcel has the best accessibility today?
You see the part that is the brightly colored piece in the upper right-hand corner on that map is the DNR property. Mm-hmm. And the light rail splits it, or the rail splits it, sorry.
So from an accessibility standpoint, the furthest north properties have the best transportation access at the moment.
Yeah, rail was, especially in our conversations with developers and brokers, rail is, while maybe helpful for certain users, the majority of the market sees it as a truck.
As a road in and out?
Yeah. It's good to have. I mean, we work with various industrial users where it's the only thing they have to have. But in this market, it's generally perceived that the majority would be truck access.
Commissioner, so Grandview would be the main access point to the park. Yeah. And Henry is the main road that divides the SSA property and the Schechter property. That's the line just north of the orange. And that's the main thoroughfare for the project.
So Don, I have a question for that. With the Grandview being you're saying being the main access, and we have a railroad situation there, we probably have to try and do what Blaine's doing with an overpass to alleviate the delays as our train.
Correct. So Blaine just got $1 million in this current budget to design that new and purchase some property for that new overpass. I put in with the city of Ferndale a request for a $50 million expansion of the Grandview off-ramp and expansion of the Grandview with utilities and an overpass over that rail. The transportation bill did not go forward, but we would expect by the time this was fully built out that there should be some kind of rail overcrossing.
So the question I was going to get to was with our other industrial people at Cherry Point, a lot of it's Grandview also, but a lot of it's Slater Road.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had to choose one or the other to service that entire area through there, would it be the Slater Road?
It'd be Grandview.
It would be Grandview.
Yeah, Grandview is right on the border of Ferndale and the county, so all of those industrial parks that are over on Grandview are not serviced, so they're under septic. And so by bringing in Grandview, we would also be servicing a large portion of Ferndale and county properties that need to be developed as well. So I think Ferndale, the county, and I have all agreed that Grandview is probably the main access point.
Okay. Gentlemen, could you tell me where we're at in the presentation? We usually take a break around this time. Are we got a ways to go yet, or?
I think we only have a handful.
Yeah, really, yeah, we have a couple more slides.
Okay, very good.
So the next two slides are some of our key observations, and I won't walk through all of these. I think a couple that I wanted to point out is this idea around demand and absorption. And a key component of this is at the scales that we just walked through, the 50 acre, 100 acre, 300 acre, there is local demand, and that's been indicated through our conversations and just looking at the market data. To spur a major industrial development to the scale that we're looking at potentially, it's not likely to be done on a speculative basis. So that would be looking at the required absorption rates across all these scenarios. Anything major that would be done out there would likely be done on a build-to-suit basis and would likely require or be supported well by a bringing in outside demand that's not here right now. It's not a generated level of demand that you've seen across Whatcom County or level of absorption you've seen in Whatcom County historically. And so that's an important point, and that's where that Canadian strategy comes into play in thinking about how to bring in those larger users and that value proposition to coincide with providing additional space for local users and companies to expand. And a lot of this speaks to that. And I think really from the standpoint of understanding the constraints on the site and further study around infrastructure and wetlands mitigation and potential consolidation of properties there, those are all things that would need to be done, whether it's port taking leadership on that or it's the property owners themselves or a developer. Those are studies that are going to have to be done. Just walking through these fairly quickly. So this slide is a framework to be thinking about from a strategy standpoint. We build out some more specifics within the report, but really outlining the goal of facilitating or implementing the development of a business park in the Cherry Point UGA. That objective we outlined at the beginning. These are different strategies we identified that are a little more detailed within the report, but these are kind of generally indicative of what we're talking about. And then connecting them to different roles the port could be taking and evaluating them from a geographical standpoint, what is the focus area for the port, and then also looking at it from a how do you evaluate from a decision-making process, policy, financial, transactional, and then generally operational as well. And so these different strategies we've outlined within the report to be considering, and I think I'd emphasize these different roles we've called for the port, where a more proactive role would be just a range of actions you could take. Be a master developer, purchase property, whether that's at Cherry Point or somewhere else within the county, and develop property in that land development role we talked about. to a facilitation role where you're looking at potentially helping fund or find funding sources for infrastructure, and being a deal maker in terms of supporting industrial development, to being a more of a broader supporter, and helping conduct industrial market analysis, putting the right people together, helping market properties, being a resource for industrial developers and landowners. So it's kind of the different scale. In terms of a port role, we wanted to talk about, this puts into context the idea of public-private partnerships and the potential there and the different roles, kind of outline 3 options or alternatives you could take. This is kind of putting in a little more detail about what I was just speaking to from a public-private partnership standpoint, where 1 is purchasing property and being the developer, where 3 is port is partnering with the land developer and supporting with public infrastructure implementation and serving that supporting role with potentially actual investment in it as well. So it's a range of options for the port to be considering, which we outline in the report. And the last slide here is just a little detail on the types of studies that are needed, who could be leading them, and then what they are. And within the report, there's a little more detail on what these look like. But these are the range of studies that we've identified. I'll walk through those quickly, but.
So what I'd like to do here is I'd like to take a short 10-minute break, because I know there's lots of questions and we get some public comments. I'd like to take a short 10-minute break and come back and continue with the agenda. please. Everyone take their seats. We're going to start with public comment. And we have one person signed up, and it's Mrs. Ellie Kinley. If you'd, either the podium or the microphone here, Ellie.
Right now?
Yep.
Hi, my name is Ellie Kinley. I'm from the Lummi Nation. And can I give you guys papers?
Certainly can.
So that's a copy I ran off real quick of a resolution that the tribe has to, pretty much says that we're always going to protect Wichiakan. That you guys know the story. It's our most ancient village site. We inhabited it for 10,000 years. I have a great grandparents that are buried there. And
Is that within the, could you go back, Don, could you go back to the area slide that shows the whole area in red? The next one was a little larger there. There we go. Whereabouts, Ellie? Do you know anywhere there where we're talking about, or the whole area in general?
no, so upper corner, we're not up there.
Right, left-hand corner?
Yeah, right.
We lost our picture there.
So are you talking about more closer to the BP site, or is it this previous slide here?
Well,
That-
because I don't have my glasses on, so I couldn't see
Okay.
when we were even sitting back there. I'm going to tell you that our cultural department, yeah, I should have brought that, is going to mark pretty much that whole as culturally significant to the Lummi tribe.
Okay.
You might get away with some area up here that's the DNR has.
Okay.
But other than that, yeah.
Do that again for me. I'm sorry.
We pretty much published that slide,
Okay.
so it's that oval. And I always base myself on this creek, and that's the only way I know
Okay.
where to go.
Could you get that particular slide or information to us,
Oh,
that
yeah.
chart?
I've got lots of that.
You have it with you? Oh, okay, if you don't, could you please get it to Diane or Rob, and they can disperse it to us
Yeah,
so that we know?
it's we have a hard time actually pointing out.
Well, just so we have a general
Yeah,
idea.
yeah.
Okay.
But we never pinpoint areas, because then
Right.
people like to go dig up.
Right, gotcha.
So that's all I wanted to do.
Okay, very good, Ellie, thank you.
Okay, thank you, guys.
Have a good evening. You didn't sign up? Oh, man, I don't know, guys, what do you think here? No, you're more than welcome to speak, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Atul Deshmani. I'm PUD Commissioner and also Planning Commissioner, but I want to make that clear. I'm not speaking in either capacity. Also, in a previous life, I have been very involved with light and heavy industrial manufacturing on a small scale. And since I live in Whatcom County, since I live in the area, my first focus was the Cherry Point industrial area. But we built nothing in Whatcom County. And the reason we built nothing in Whatcom County was because there was no easily accessible rail infrastructure. So small and medium-sized businesses desperately need, that are doing heavy manufacturing, refining, like I was involved with, need rail infrastructure. So one facility we built out at March's Point. Also adjacent, another facility was a terminal facility adjacent to what is now Sierra Pacific, was before Sierra Pacific was there, at the old Ignatec facility. And the third project we were involved with was actually downtown Mount Vernon and the Mount Vernon Terminal Railway. All three, same theme, rail right there. So I'd encourage the port in its economic development analysis to think about how rail infrastructure might support small and medium-sized heavy industrial work. I don't know how important, from an economic development perspective, you think that plays a role in economic development of the county, but well, from the view of my prior life as a small business owner, it was really important to me. And so I just wanted you to consider that. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Don, if you, we'll have question and answer time now, I guess, for the gentleman.
So I'm guessing we're going to tag team you as to stuff that's addressed to me and stuff for the study.
However you gentlemen would like to do it. Commissioner Bell, do you have any questions?
Not at the moment, but I will.
You're still thinking them up. Commissioner Shepherd.
Do we know the location City of Bellingham is proposing for a wetland bank?
I don't have the location right now. I know that I believe they're in permit stage on their first phase of it. And I also believe that it's already fully sold out. As with the Lummies, their first, they've announced that at this point, the mitigation credits are only good for tribal members right now.
Okay, so if we can get, I'd like to know where the location of that City of Bellingham one is, and
I do have a map of that within the full report.
Okay.
Their service area is what I have a map of, so the area where you could, where developers could, or landowners could buy credits. So it's generally reflective of the city's UGA and then beyond along Bellingham Bay there.
Is that it?
Yeah. Oh, do we have that?
Oh, look at how fancy that is.
Wow, when did we get that? That's kind of cool. Pull that out of the drawer, didn't you? He's like a magician. He needs a hat. We gotta give him a hat. We gotta give him a hat.
Still gotta make it work. Don't
Oh, yeah. The black screen. That's better than the blue one, Rob. So maybe while he's working on that, I got some questions that we don't need the slide for. The DNR lands, what is current, I haven't been out there for a while. What's currently on those, or what's going on with that? Do we know anything, Don, or?
Yeah, at this point, I don't believe so. There have been talks in the past about taking that site as the high point in the project to put a large water tank there to supply fresh water. But at this point, it was taken over by DNR, I think, in the last few years. It's approximately 80 acres, I think.
I think it's 50.
50 acres. So it's just being held.
Probably a lot of pheasants there, huh?
Exactly.
As far as the use on that DNR site, can that be used? Can you put infrastructure in there? Can we use the same as the rest of the property or not with that?
It'd be a matter of whether the public wants to sell that property or not.
Okay.
It is the high point. I believe it's heavily treed, but I'm guessing that it's developable.
Okay, very good. We talked about the railroad crossings. We've talked a little bit about the on-site water. The gentleman that just spoke to the rail spur, I believe there's a rail spur in there, correct?
There's a rail line right through there.
Right through there, yeah. So they could there could be a spur off of that to service anything there if we needed it. So that part of
It takes some
it,
engineering to figure out how you avoid,
okay,
you have to mitigate some wetlands depending on the curvature of the spur.
correct.
Sure, but it's there if it's.
Yeah, so there's enough room in there to put a spur in anyway, if need be.
It would mostly be up to BNSF as to whether they want to cooperate on additional rail there and whether some of the other users out there would give up some of their rail line.
I see, okay, very good. Oh, yeah, the EIS statement that coincides with the early study that was done on that, is that still good, or is that going to have to be would that have to be redone? Environmental impact statement on that?
For the Gateway Pacific Terminal EIS?
Yeah, for your presentation, there's been an environmental impact statement done on a prior study there. Is that still good for the area we study, or would a new one have to be done?
That was specific to that proposal, so any new proposal, different use, different configuration would require new EIS and permitting work.
Okay.
And having said, there's a lot of background.
There's a lot of knowledge.
In fact, we pulled a lot of, as much as we could that was publicly available. It was, wetland delineations and stuff like that. So it's good background data for an industrial area.
Yeah, which would probably speed up the process if one was needed to be done.
So the SSA property had the terminal, and that was a specific use, which is much different than a business park. And then the Schechter property, 20-something years ago, they started 2 industrial buildings and poured 2 60,000-foot slabs there. And then Mr. Schechter passed away, and that property was never finished. We believe the slabs are still good, and so there's a potential for 2 buildings to be built out there if they go through county process.
I see, okay. Commissioner Shepherd, back to your questions.
Yeah, are you able to point out
Yes.
what I'm looking at here?
This is, the green here is the service area that they've identified. And I believe I outlined it here. The specific number of credits they've outlined in the city of Bellingham. They're estimating it to be active by 2022. Oh, cool.
Pen for you. Now you can draw whatever you want.
You're going to get him a magician's hat.
There you go.
Wow. You're really getting the technology award of the day, Rob. I love this.
We would have been drawing on it the whole time.
Let me know if there's anything else you want me to point out.
Okay, guys, I'm right there with you, okay?
That's the general service area so it's encompassing the Bellingham UGA and then outside areas, and then the mitigation bank sites are within that as well. So there's, I believe, 6 mitigation bank sites that they've established and they're studying. So they have a big process in front of them to through the Army Corps to establish that, but they're in that right now, and they have a pretty good documentation. We spoke with them about where they're at, and right now they have a couple of years of permitting and evaluation of those sites and the plan itself. So it's a big process to establish something like this, and in Don's conversations with them and ours, there's demand for this, and it's open to both local or public and private use. I think they've identified some major public projects that would leverage at least a portion of the credits. But this would be the only broadly public available mitigation bank in the county. And when you look up and down the Western Washington region, each county has at least one mitigation bank.
Okay. So this is the service area that any credits could come from, but the physical location of the bank is going to be not in this service area. It's going to be proposed in the Cherry Point region?
So the banks themselves, the sites where the wetlands themselves are, and the whatever plan they've developed for those wetland sites, and is all within here. And the service area generally represents where projects that are being developed can buy credits.
Okay.
This is the area that it's generally going to service. So somebody that needs to mitigate wetlands on their site to buy from the city of Bellingham, they need to be within this green or the blue circle I've drawn.
Okay.
Commissioner, just to make it clear, Bellingham is not looking at Cherry Point as
I see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But they're still, still recognizing a potential need and opportunity there for a larger wetland bank, both to facilitate development of these sites and to absorb other credit opportunities for other sites in the region.
Yeah, correct. I contacted one of the largest for-profit wetland mitigation banking companies that I had worked with in the past. They own a bank of about, I think, 180 acres in Skagit County, and this is what they do. So that's an opportunity. If the public didn't want to do it, if it made sense for them, they would come in and create the bank and then sell the credits.
Okay. All right. That's all my questions on banks for now. Back to the slides for the presentation, and this piggybacks on Ellie's comment. I noticed your list of entities that were engaged through the process did not include the Lummi Nation. Was that a choice or an oversight?
I would say it's an oversight. I think through our interaction with Dawn and looking at the site, we felt like we had a good sense of, at least from a mitigation and wetland standpoint, where that was at. And we did leverage that knowledge and incorporate it in the study. We didn't reach out to them specifically about cultural resources or overlays. That's something that could certainly happen and be a component. And I do think one addition based on that feedback is part of any permitting process or study at a larger scale is likely going to require through SEPA some level of investigation of those resources. So that'd be an important component of any future development.
Some of the feedback at the outset of this was we were really looking at we weren't really going anywhere near the shoreline. We were thinking about the shoreline or export, so we were really more focused inland from that. So
Sure.
I think that was part of the, thinking that it was something that would come up during permitting, but wasn't necessarily on the front burner at the moment.
Yeah. And the tribe has very clear interests about permitting around the shoreline.
Yeah.
And they also have interests throughout the larger property and the region as a whole. So I think some of my feedback would be to make sure you guys spend some more time with that outreach and engagement. I noticed from the 1998 study, there was a substantial amount of engagement with the Lummi Nation at that time. And that was reflected in that 1998 study.
And if you recall, the 98 study was the entire region, the 7,000 acres, which also included terminals and water access.
Okay. Well, personally, this presentation and this report comes a long way from the 1998 version, and I appreciate you taking into consideration what has changed here in those years, both in terms of recognition of the Lummi Nation's sovereignty and treaty rights and their ability to determine usage, and also the interests of Whatcom County citizens around fossil fuel development. And I'm pleased to see that there's not a proposal for additional fossil fuel projects here, and that hasn't been the thrust of this investigation and this study that you've done. So I think that is aligned with what I see are interests of the community.
And another comment regarding the Lummi is we fully hope and expect that these will be higher paying jobs that eventually will be there, that the Lummis would have the opportunity to be employed adjacent to their reservation.
Well, certainly it's something we need countywide, and if you look at employment rates in the Lummi Nation, they are substantially higher, to the tune of 4 to 5 times higher than elsewhere in the county. So there's a inequity there that I know economic development is a benefit to. And so I think those conversations would be productive about ways that development does align with those interests and values of the tribe. That's it for me.
Mr. Bell, you have anything further?
Yeah, I didn't see on here, I've got to do this for Sunil. I didn't see the regional airport proposal that Sunil is trying to advance on this. He's kidding. He's kidding. No, I have nothing. I think you guys addressed everything that I would like to address. Thank you. This is amazing stuff. Thanks.
So one more thing, I would hope that the Lummi Nation would be more involved if this was something that was to go forward in perhaps a business out there rather than just employing folks. Maybe they had some kind of businesses they could bring forward and we could jointly work on there. So I would hope this would be much more than just an employment opportunity for those folks. Other than that, I have no further questions. It was a great presentation. Thank you for your time. I know it's took a lot of time to do, and we appreciate that, and it was a very good presentation. Don, I commend you for your work so far as our economic director. I think you're doing a very good job, and we're lucky to have you spearheading some of this stuff. You do things very in-depth, and you're very thorough, and you're very knowledgeable, and we appreciate that. It's what we needed here for a long time. Thank you. So with that, gentlemen, we're going to move to other business. Commissioner Shepard.
All right. Let's see, I wanted to call out two awards. One, I just heard today that the City of Bellingham Parks Department got an award for the Waypoint Park beach, and I think it was for restoration of a beach property or something of that nature, but they got a national award, one of 4 beaches in the country that was identified for this award. So congratulations to the city, and we are pleased to have that asset here as part of our waterfront redevelopment. Great.
I was going to say it is a
Good.
joint award, and the
Glad you noted that.
port staff worked very hard on that, and the staff's name should be on that award as well, as far as I'm concerned. I think
agree.
you guys did a great job working jointly with the city. The city did a great job, and we came out with a great park, and that's obvious from the award, but we all know that it was a great joint effort. Thank you, Brian.
Good partnership. Thank you. And second one I want to acknowledge is that our economic development team was successful in getting some curb funding for broadband. Gina, what was the total we got? Would you just give us a quick update on our success there and how that propels us to our next steps?
Absolutely. Gina Stark, Economic Development Project Manager. So yes, we were successful in getting from CURB just a little over 1.1 million. It was one very odd figure, so I won't exactly say what it was. Thank you, Commissioner. And the great thing about that is when I originally presented to you commissioners, it was going to be a 25% grant and a 75% loan. And I'm pleased to say that it ended up being a 50% grant and a 50% loan. We got a little bit less, and that's just because CURB let a little bit put in more applications into their pool, so we did get a little bit less. But at the end of the day, the project is going to be completely funded. We got our $750,000, 100% grant from the county with our EDI money, and then the rest will be coming from the port. So we are fully funded, and we will be going forward to construction. So we now get to do the real tough work. We're going to be going forward and doing an RFQ for engineering, which then will be subcontracting. Already in conversations with PSC in terms of applications for our poles, because the majority of that route, segment 1, will be on poles. So really already getting a lot of the pieces into place to go forward in construction, and hopefully that will be in spring of 2020. So.
Well, fantastic work on that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very much. It's gotten lots of positive public press and accolades from the community. There's a lot of excitement to see this happen, and I don't want to understate the size of an investment this is. This is a major project for us. It's going to have a major benefit, and we came back from WPPA, and we're really at the forefront of what ports are doing throughout the state. And a lot of other ports are looking to the example we are starting to set here as the way forward on this. There's tons of interest and tons of excitement around doing this type of work. So I'm thrilled to be a part of it here.
Yes, thank you, and thank you very much for your support. And I get lots of calls from other ports just saying, how have you guys done this? Really helping it so we're not all reinventing the wheel. So again, thank you so much for your guys' support. Appreciate it.
So I've got two more. My next is about foam. I have been in some conversation with firefighters from the Local 106 and hearing some about what's happening at other airports in the state. And I'd like to get an update on our use of foam at the airport and how that aligns with state and national practices. It's my understanding that the foam we use at our airport and is FAA approved is not a product that is utilized by fire departments in other locations because of the hazardous substances inside and their impact on both people and the environment. And I understand it's a tricky situation because we may be required or given guidance to use a particular foam by the FAA, and that foam is no longer used nationally, and there's increasing number of fire departments that have stopped using the foam, and to my knowledge, SeaTac is one of them.
We'll get you an update on that.
I'd like to get an update on where we are with that. If there's a product that is not good for our employees and our environment, I would like us to think about moving on from it.
We'll give you an update next commission meeting.
Great. And my last one is on fertilizer. So we've had some interest from community individuals contacting me and our staff about use of fertilizer and herbicides on our port properties. And I know our staff is looking into some alternatives, and I'm wondering if staff has an update on that yet, or if we can get that soon.
You'll have to find out where we're at on that. I know we were looking at the county and the city's programs, some other programs of ports around the state, and trying to develop our own program. We don't have a formal written program, so our desire was to create one of those, but I'll get you an update on that as well.
Okay. Well, part of the interest was Port of Seattle they've gone for a salmon safe certification because of their adoption of all organic fertilizer and products that they're putting on their all of their lawns and shrubs and everything else. And I think the community contacts that were made were quite concerned about the proximity of utilization of those chemicals to the water, which if there are suitable alternatives and we're able to get a nice badge of being salmon safe, I think that's a real win for us. Great, thank you. That's it.
Mr. Bell.
I'm just going to add just a personal note, if I could do a commercial for my company. We're actually doing a pilot program for Jacobs Engineering next week on fire suppressant foam and what the cleanup method is for the PFAS type chemical down in Portland.
You know, if you're going to do that, you got to use the podium.
I'll give you a tour of that location. But it is a big problem because it's so, it migrates so easily in water.
So you'll be recusing yourself from that vote?
So I'll be recusing myself from any further fire suppressant discussions. That being said, I really wanted to say today that WPPA is one of those organizations that I wanted to speak highly of. And I also wanted to make sure that everybody in the public understood what an asset we have in our attorney. And I would love to make a joke here, but
Go ahead.
It would diminish what I have to say.
Tamara's not here. You can take the floor.
The number of people who cling on his every word is astounding to me because I've gone way beyond that with Mr. Schmelik. But what he knows and what he says and what he does at these meetings has been an incredible asset, and we have it right here in our midst. And it can't be understated what a value you bring not only to us but to the organizations around the state. And it really shows. And I will also say that WPPA, from my standpoint, is an incredible organization where this time we got to learn about some things that with other commissioners that you don't normally get to do. The discussions on trade with China and how tariffs were going to impact us and how other commissioners are responding to all of the issues that we are responding to was just huge. But at the end of the day, you just cannot walk out of there and come home and not feel just proud of the legal representation that we have here and what they mean to the state port associations. That's all.
You must have watched the YouTube meeting I think it was about 2 years ago, and I said pretty much the same thing. Frank, we're very, very grateful to have your knowledge on board because without it, we'd all be scratching our head a lot of times and probably have our hand and foot in our head in a bear trap and be in big trouble. So thank you for what you do.
I actually plagiarized that entire speech. I wrote the whole
Thank you
speech
all.
down.
Thanks, that's very generous of you.
And the rest of your group as well. The folks that are, you have surrounding you are very good also.
You know, when you blush, it starts here and goes,
Large forehead.
Look up. Okay, I have a few things. The first one, Don and Gina are probably going to be able to answer my questions. I had a conversation with a gentleman at a gathering, and he brought to my attention circular fiber optic. So like we're running to an end. We're running a line out, let's say to Kendall. We need to go around a hill and come back. And one of the reasons he spoke to that is, and it made a lot of sense, businesses, if you have a break somewhere, businesses, if it's not circular, business have less tendency to come there to hook up, because once it's down, it's down. Whereas if it's a circular route, it comes back the other way and they're still going. So has that been considered I haven't heard us talk about that very much.
Yeah, so what he's referring to, and it's something that I've brought up before, it's called redundancy. And it's yes, it's when one line goes down, you have the circular pattern, and basically it continues on, and so there isn't a break in the service to your customers. And it's something that we've discussed, and it essentially means that we have to run an additional line, and so that creates an additional cost. And so that is something that I am looking into. I'm having our GIS guy who did our additional routes kind of look into it to see how much it would cost, because we're having such an issue with the whole new broadband office going to the governors, and these issues with funding. We have to be mindful of that. But yes, that is something that we are looking into in terms of redundancy. And I know Executive Director Rob has some comments too as well.
When all the phases are built, you'll have redundancy.
Yeah.
It's the loop you're talking about.
When it's all said and
When
done.
it's
When it's
all
all
the
said and
phases are
done.
built. Now,
Yeah.
the first phase won't have that redundancy. By definition, it's only a phase of the project, but when it's all done, you'll have that loop.
So in that same context, with our East County being kind of the place that really needs it, I would think the most to start with, is that where we would aim to get that done first in our phases, or?
Well, and that is something that because it was brought up specifically in terms of the East County, in terms of us going out to Glacier, the question comes up, what if, a car hits one of the telephone poles and the, line goes down. It is a question that is very relevant, and so that's what we're having looked at. Okay, let's take a look at that, because we also have other things that we're looking at in terms of some cellular towers. We're looking at other things as in terms of potential other technology, so that can also come into play. But it's a really real question, not in terms of just our residents or our businesses, but in terms of emergency services. So it's an important question to look at, so that is something that I'm looking at specifically with East County. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
When Gina and I went to County Council for our EDI funding approval, Councilmember Brown was the person that was a very important issue. And basically I answered it that we would love to have redundancy, but you can't have redundancy until you have your first line. So our goal is first to get areas that don't have service, and then we'll work on a redundancy plan.
That was my question, if it was in the processes or not. And it is, so thank you. Thank you. And by the way, Gina, you've done very good work, very good work. We're lucky to have you on board with this project too. Thank you. Commissioner Bell, you said you have one other item.
yeah, I really want to go on record. We had a great week last week.
Just more advertising? You gotta go to the podium.
No, we got the broadband money through. We got the Puglia agreement done. We got a great decision on the Alaska Ferry from our standpoint. It wasn't what we wanted. It wasn't all we could get, but again, we were looking at nothing at one point.
It's not done yet, so don't jinx it, but yeah, we're looking good.
Yeah, and it just means that we get to keep it, but all of that involved a ton of hard work. I mean, a lot of behind-the-scenes stuff, a lot of travels to Alaska for the ferry, a lot of meeting with legislators to get the broadband through, a lot of discussions with bankers and the rest. And this port has just been an amazing from a staff standpoint and what it can do. And I just want to commend you on the work you did on the Alaska Ferry, because we know the hard work is done behind those doors and in those back rooms, and not necessarily in public. So just thank you all. So I wanted to acknowledge the ferry as well.
I shouldn't have let you talk because it was next on my list. You guys, I let these guys go first, I don't get to say anything.
I not only took your Schmeling speech, but I took
Yeah,
this one
yeah,
from.
yeah. Well, I'm still gonna comment,
hacking-
I'm still gonna
hacking-
comment on it.
I'm hacking your webpage.
You know, all aspects on all ends of everybody that worked on keeping that ferry service in here in Bellingham and trying to keep it, and I'm a positive thinker, I think we have kept it, I really do believe we have. We're gonna have some limited service in the wintertime, I'm sure of that. But from the things I've been reading, I think we're in pretty good shape. From the folks that met over at the ferry service and gathered there and let the media know what was going on, that was one very integral part of it. The other part is our staff, Rob, spent a lot of time in Alaska in the capital, meeting with all the political folks there, as well as other folks, to try and maintain that service here, and I think on all ends a good job was done. You can't be everywhere at once, so some people certainly weren't where other people thought maybe they should have been, but they were probably somewhere trying to do something behind the scenes to make this happen. There was a lot of work done behind the scenes by port staff and the port to ensure that that thing would stay here, because it's a very big part of our community. So I'd like to thank Rob for all the time he put in, as well as staff and the other folks. I know there's some of those folks present here today that were at the ferry terminal helping out over there with and the news media end of things. Thank you for that. We got at the airport, I received an email, and I'm not sure if everybody else did, about the premiums out there, the coverage out there, jumping from $1 million to $2 million for our people that own an airplane. And they might have contacted the right fellow, because the insurance jumps like that are very costly. We see that in my industry, the fishing industry. We see that quite often, where you've got $1 million, you got to go to 2, you got to go to 3. It gets a little bit carried away with premiums. So I have a question, and it's unfortunate that Sunil is not here, but I'd like to get a few answers on if that's a mandatory across the board, or if that happened to slip through when we passed this stuff and it passed it on to the folks out there, because it seems to me like $2 million is a lot of coverage I mean, I'd like to look at it and see if we can help out, because from my understanding, the premiums just don't double. They've gone up close to 3-4 times from what this person has told me. And I'm just repeating what I was told, so I'd like to look into it a little bit, and I'm sure you have some comments on that, Rob.
Sure. I mean, we don't arrive at that just in the dark. We talk to other airports, we talk to our insurance consultants, we talk to the carriers themselves, we look at claims, what they've run up. Those planes can do a lot of damage. $1 million is not a lot of coverage. Typically, when you double the limit of your liability, it does not double your premium. An extra $1 million on top of $1 million doesn't cost 100% more. It's less than that. I'm happy to talk to the people at the airport, have those questions. Sunil and I will sit down with them. But again, the figure was not arrived at in the dark. It was gotten there.
Oh, no, I didn't mean that. I just meant that, in our passing, the airport stuff we did, that if something didn't slip through the cracks and it got put onto people unintentionally, I'm not sure.
The port has been on the wrong end of some claims recently that are pretty heavy, and so we're very conscious of that, and we know that $1 million does not go very far when you're in a courtroom.
Yeah, as we should be. Okay. So
was that part of our, when did that get decided that the insurance requirement was raised?
I'd have to ask Sunil. I don't.
I believe, if I might be incorrect, but I believe it went through when we passed our complete packet out there for our changes out there for
we did the rules and regulations.
I think it was
at some point recently we did the
Master
rules
plan and rules and regs.
I believe so.
I think so, yeah.
Because it never came up. I had a lot of discussions with a lot of GA tenants about the rules and regs, and that piece never came up.
Right, so I don't know if there was something that slid in and we didn't know it or what happened there, but there's a couple folks that have contacted me, they're a little upset, but whether they're rightly upset or not, I don't know yet, but we just find out.
I'm going to speak to this a little bit. I mean, my insurance policies for most of my cleanup stuff went from $2 million to $5 million over the last couple of years. And a lot of that $1 million liability, it doesn't take you but 10 minutes to spend $1 million anymore in this day and age.
You don't have to convince me.
Yeah, I just think, I think it's not unreasonable. And I also know that the jump from a $1 million policy to a $2 million policy is not double in the insurance rate.
No, sure.
The most expensive dollars in any litigation are the first dollars.
Yeah.
Rightly so, but gentlemen,
Zero to one.
when we're asked by the public to bring something forward and have a question about what we've done, we have to do so,
And we'll get you more information on that, Commissioner. We'll talk, we'll show you some examples of how we got there.
And I'll piggyback on that and say, I don't think we've got enough at the airport if we ever had a plane.
Well, the $2 million limit is not what the port
No, I know,
carries.
I'm saying we should probably look at our
I think we have 50 million at the airport plus maybe,
coverages.
yeah, I think we're over 50 million.
we're covering commercial too, so. Okay, on to my last item, has to do with our commission and transparency. So we started the other items agenda, and I believe it was Commissioner Shepard's request, so we could discuss things in public because we can't talk to each other, correct? Am I mistaken? Okay. So that's how we kind of got the other items on here, and since we've done it, I think we've talked amongst ourselves maybe once, maybe twice at the most. So this evening, I've got some, questions I'd like to ask and some things I'd like to discuss. One of the things, and I know everybody in the audience is going, oh, what's he doing now? Well, this is the way it is. What's that?
You got the commissioners doing that. Why is he doing that?
So when I became a commissioner, one of the things that was done was right off the bat, it was, okay, what's your agenda? And we talked about it amongst ourselves, what are your high points you want to hit for the year? Or what are your goals? So I'd kind of like to do that at this point in time, because since you guys have been here, we haven't really done that. Legally, we can't talk amongst ourselves outside the commission meetings, unless all three of us are together and it's a noted meeting by our Secretary Diane. So, Commissioner Bell.
You can't just hit me out of the blue like that.
Okay, well, I'll start with myself. I'll make it easy for you guys. You can think while I'm talking. When I came here, I'll say the same thing I said when I was brought into office. I didn't come here with an agenda. I came here wanting to do a job for the people of Whatcom County. There were some things that were important to me to get done. I wanted transparency was one of the biggest things. We'd had a lot of things that had gone on in the previous years with the port that had created problems, and a lot of what I heard when I was running for office was transparency. The port needs to be more transparent. And I think in that time, I think we've done a very good job. I think the port's been very transparent. I think that staff has worked well with the folks in this county. I haven't heard any negative things, really. There's disputes, there's arguments like there always is, and you can't make everybody happy, but I think we've worked very well, and my agenda is still the same. I work for the people of Whatcom County. I want to do what's best for the people of Whatcom County, and however we can make the economy better and put people to work and not harm the environment and make it better for everybody. That's what I want to do. That's why I'm here. I'm not here for any kind of personal gain. I'm certainly not here for rest, because you don't get much doing this job sometimes, but that's why I'm here. I don't have anything in particular that I'm driving or focused on. If whatever comes up, I just want to make sure we can do it. And if it's for the benefit of the people and they want it, well, let's get it done right the first time. And that's a big thing to me, doing things right, getting them done right the first time. I don't like to spend people's money if you don't have to spend it. I like to do it right, and I like to look into the future, not 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. I want to go out 20, 30, 40 years, and when we do something around here, I want to make it last, because as everybody in this room knows, we're fixing things from a long time ago that should have lasted longer, could have had better vision. So that's kind of where I'm at, and I don't have any particular things going on that I'm running and seeing anybody about, or other than now I have a campaign. There's that, right there, Anthony. Thank you. So that's what I got going on, and that lets you know where I'm at. I don't have any particular, I want to fix it all. Problem is, I can't get it done. Everything kind of moves too slow. So would you or you like to?
Is this something we've had, on occasion, we've had a work session prior to the meeting where we're able to do some more of that dialogue, and I hear some interest in agenda setting, and that seems like it could have a natural correlation with budget process. Maybe this would be a good topic for us to schedule for one of those work sessions.
I don't know if we can do that.
Sure you can. Yeah, you can do whatever you want in an open public meeting. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I don't want to get in the bear trap.
Yeah, I mean, as long as we schedule it, it's an open meeting, we can set the topic of our choice. That can either be a specific topic for, a work item, or a brainstorming session, or agenda setting opportunity. And it's something we don't do, because we don't get to have these kind of more informal conversations.
Yeah, so I was just curious what everybody's doing, what do you want to get done when you're here? That's about where I was at.
Well, I'm still trying to figure out how to finish hacking into your computers to get your speeches and agenda items. No, it's a good discussion. I think really I'm with Commissioner Shepherd on this. I've recently taken a different tack on a couple of things. I'm really surprised by the amount of money it takes to do construction and to get people to come to the table on things for us now. So when I walk into this budget meeting, it's going to be with a different hat to see, because I know a recession is coming and I know a downtime is coming. And so as we walk into the projects that are on our plate going forward, I'm going to really be strong on trying to talk to you guys about putting some of this off to a time when we know we're going to need it, and putting construction projects in our hands and having money in the bank so that when we have a downturn, we are the relief valve for the county. We are the relief valve for those who are going to be unemployed and out of work, which is what I think a responsible government should be. So really, if there's anything that was on the top of my head, that's it. It's just the fiscal responsibility part of that, and where the port fits in that. If we've got to pay retail prices for construction because construction's so tight, you saw it up there in the upper right-hand corner. It's a whole different thing when that construction's down in the bottom left, and we've got unemployment rampant, for the port to have resources to dip into to bail out the people who will need employment at that point. So that's really where I'm headed into the budget discussion with, and we can talk about that more there. Along with some other things, but it really is my focus at this point, is to make sure that we're responsible as we move forward with the construction projects.
Yeah.
And our capital costs.
So with that in mind.
Yes, sir.
No, sir, no royalty in my family. So with that in mind, how do you project the timing on that to be, with permits taking so long to get, and everything so hard to do? How do you project the timing? I mean, I'm in agreement with you, don't get me wrong. Maybe this is something for food for thought for you to think about. How do you project the timing when to apply to do those projects, and how do you hold on to those permits that long to do them in a timely fashion to make happen what you're saying?
Well,
I mean, it's a good idea. I like it.
No, I have found in my experience that when the times are rougher and when there's less on the plate, permits are a lot easier to get, and they're a lot more timely, and they're a lot less expensive. And it's the same with like our environmental assessment. We only got one bidder on that one project to go do the assessment. Well, you'll have 5 or 6. The cost will come down. Agencies are less, they're more interested in expediting those things at those times. Right now, they're packed, because they're flooded with information.
So you think it'll go hand in hand, the permit process will slow way down? I would disagree with you, and I might even bet you on that one.
Who wants to oppose a permit for a worthy project in a downtime when the jobs are needed and you've got money to spend for wages? I think I've found in my time that those are much easier to get through during those downtimes than they are during these times. That's why a pump track takes 7 months to get permitted.
Well, I would love to. I think this is a good conversation for us to schedule and keep having more. One of my other interests is and we discussed this in the Environment Committee meeting at WPPA, is interest in setting some long-range strategic planning around climate reduction or climate mitigation and reducing climate impacts. And so I think it's something that a lot of ports are going to be looking for answers. And we've already got some examples from climate action plans that are in the works at the city and the county and other ports like Seattle. And I think it would be a really important opportunity for us to set some of those aspirational goals so we're able to plan for the future and also get credit for the great things that we've already achieved. Because we have made some really important achievements, and we have some in the pipe. And without that matrix of planning, we're not able to really capture those achievements when we get them and look towards the future for where we're going. So that's something I'm interested in working with staff on charting out as part of our future planning efforts.
Rightly so. So moving ahead a little bit further, also when I became a commissioner, or prior to my becoming a commissioner, after I'd been elected, before I was sworn in, my fellow commissioners that I was going to be going to work with both had meetings with me because they wanted to know kind of who I was, where I was coming from, what was going on, and they wanted to let me know about some of the protocol that they had in place that they used that was unwritten. And part of that was your executive director, and which was still Director Fix at that time, and is still Director Fix, hopefully for a while longer yet. He's key to our commission working well, and he's key to the port working well. He's key to the staff working well. Everything from us needs to trickle through him to get the staff to make it all work properly. It's a team effort. And what they said to me was, this is how it works, and we'd like to see it stay that way when you're there. And it was good advice at that time, and I reflect back on it now, and it was very good advice. Everything you do, everything you're thinking about, every meeting you have, whether you think it's significant or non-significant, you need to talk to Director Fix about. That, and that's still the way I do it. I think that's the way it should be done. So anytime we have a meeting with somebody, or excuse me, anytime I have a meeting with anyone, it doesn't matter whether it's a member of the public or it's a member of another government agency, or I let Director Fix know, and then after the meeting, I usually give him a call and kind of give him a little rundown on what went on and what it was about and kind of what the outcome was. So it's worked very well. So as your senior commissioner and your president, I would implore you and ask you kindly to try and do that because it keeps everybody informed of what everybody's doing so that the machine works clearly, and it keeps transparency. And transparency is a big thing to me. I get really upset, as I did a while ago, and people are still upset with me about that when I spoke out on something that I believe there wasn't transparency, and there wasn't transparency. It turned out one of the folks involved had told me there wasn't transparency. So to Director Fix, that's why I will maintain what I've been doing in the time I've been here up until I'm either not here or I am here. So it works very well, and I would certainly hope that we can do that. If you guys have any reflections on that, it'd be good.
If I can, real quick on that one. I think we, the staff, has probably gotten a little sloppy in that. We used to make sure all 3 commissioners were copied on every document that was sent out, and I've noticed recently 1 or 2 commissioners getting copied, not everyone, maybe the commissioner that has an interest in the subject. So I'll commit to us doing a better job for making sure all 3 of you are involved in everything we're doing.
Thank you, Rob. One more thing. Walsh Marine Building, where are we at on are we rebidding? What are we doing?
I think we're going in July for a rebid on that one.
In July?
Yeah.
So that'll set us back. Can you let us know how long that possibly could set this project back?
Greg Nichols, Senior Project Engineer. Yeah, we're looking at rebidding it in July. Before we do go back out to bid, we are going to check the bidding climate by contacting a number of the contractors out there to make sure we're putting it out at the most optimal time. That will result in us building the projects between probably September through January is the scheduled completion for that project.
Okay. Thank you. That being said, Commissioner Bell, you have anything further? Commissioner Shepard? Meeting adjourned.